Good evening and welcome to The Right Side, the show where we usually talk about today's news, views, trends, and opinions from an admittedly conservative perspective. I'm your host, Chris Pareja, and this evening we're going to do something that you might consider a little different. We're actually going to bring in the other side. If you've watched the show at all, you know that we do often do that. But tonight, I'm going to be interviewing Ann Reidy, or in fact, having a discussion with her. She's the founder of American Pals. And we're going to be talking about something that should be happening on a national level. And that is, how do we bring the country together at the kneecap to kneecap level, around kitchen tables, in shopping malls, and other places where liberals and conservatives tend to congregate with one another, but may not interact peacefully. So, Ann, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
And so, just before we get started, I always like to get a little bit of background, build up your street cred a little bit, and just understand context of how you got involved in what you do. And so I know you have a little bit of a background in education, but explain that and where you hail from and give us a little background.
Sure. So I, at the beginning of my career, started out as a college professor at Wellesley College. I had just gotten my PhD in German literature. And very quickly realized the ivory tower was not for me, so I moved out to California and became the chair of the history department at an independent high school in Marin County, and served there for 6-7 years before then taking on a role with a charter school organization called Leadership Public Schools. I was the development director there for a number of years. And then hit the pause button when my kids were young and I wanted to spend a bit more time with them. And just about the time of the election, I was ramping up to re-enter the workforce. And then the election happened. And I was stunned, like a lot of people who were not expecting that outcome.
Neither was Donald.
I don't think he was either. But was really, truly stunned. And that really informed then the choices I've made since then about what career path to choose. And right after the election, I was so in shock, as was my husband, that we realized, wow, we have been living in such a bubble. We need to get out of this bubble. So we packed up our kids. We flew to New York City, rented a car, and then spent the summer driving cross country to really get into conservative American. And we took small state roads, did not go to any of the places on people's usual list of attractions, but really tried to go into small towns in the Midwest and talk to people that we otherwise would never talk with. And this has become sort of a passion of mine now, is really trying to bridge this divide and help blue and red America understand each other a bit.
You've just sparked all sorts of questions in my head. One of them is, what was so shocking or disturbing to you about Donald's election?
Well, I mean, I think like many people, you know, we had been led to believe by all the polling that was out there, for one thing, that the outcome was going to be different than it was. And I'll be honest with you, Chris, I'm not a supporter of Donald Trump, and not only am I not a supporter, I'm really troubled by him. And I thought to myself, surely there's no way this can happen in America, that somebody like this can be elected. So
talk to me about the somebody like this part, because that's what I'm trying to get context of and trying to figure out where that level of shock comes from. So the somebody like this, what does somebody like this look like?
Violating a lot of basic norms for civil discourse and how we interact with each other. I think, you know, throughout our history, presidents have exhibited moral leadership. And he was somebody who seemed to not only exhibit any moral leadership, but really mock the whole idea. You know, I found his statements and alleged treatment of women to be appalling, still do. And found statements, you know, in the debate with Hillary Clinton, where she called him out on, you know, not paying his fair share in taxes, and him saying, well, that just makes me smart. I thought that was appalling. You know, I could go on and on. But I thought, surely this can't happen. And the reality is he did not get elected by the majority of Americans. But, in the electoral system he did. But it was still not what I expected. And I know that a lot of people in blue America, like me, shared a similar sense of shock, disappointment, and then that translated pretty quickly for me into a sense that this is an all-hands-on-deck moment, not just to get him out of the presidency, but forget that. This country is so divided. That's not sustainable.
Right. So, we talked about before the show, part of our whole objective for this is to get to know the opposing mindset slightly. My question is, did you feel like Hillary had a higher moral standard or character behind her?
I had mixed feelings about Hillary, I'll be honest. I'll be very candid. I was not a Bernie supporter, but I was also not a big fan of Hillary Clinton.
Right.
And yet, their values aligned more closely with the ones I hold, and so did vote for Hillary Clinton.
Right.
I felt that there was a basic sense of respect for the office, for the institutions of American democracy that she demonstrated, a respect for the other people that she would disagree with. I don't see that with Donald Trump. When he disagrees with somebody, he, often resorts to mockery. And so while I didn't embrace all of her ideas and some of her behaviors didn't sit well with me at times, I felt like that basic respect for civic institutions was important.
Okay. So from the flip side, I can tell you that a lot of people didn't support Donald Trump either. It was the same kind of thing. And it's one of those things, having run for office, I've seen it. A lot of times people don't pay attention in the primary elections, and so they don't get involved into the general elections, and people usually on both sides are extremely disturbed with the choices that they have available at that point, and now they're voting for the one who scares them least versus the one who they really would have chosen if they had gotten involved earlier. Would you say that that's kind of the way that it worked out from?
Yeah. I think, I know a lot of people who voted for Hillary because she was the candidate that was running against Trump. And, they weren't huge fans of hers necessarily. And I suspect that there were plenty of people that voted for Trump who had not voted for him in the primary. Right.
And I can just tell you that on the other side, the voices were, I'm voting for anybody but Hillary. And so we found common ground. Both sides are irritated that by the time the elections come around, there's a lack of choice. Now, on the conservative side, that happened in the last election where Obama was elected and then re-elected, and they were the weeping that hasn't happened yet sounded very similar on the conservative side when Obama moved into office, because people were not active, they were not happy with choices necessarily, but they went with who scared them least. Yeah. And so Obama got in, was there for 2 terms, and then one of the things that's very interesting is, as you noted, the polling was not in favor of Trump. But it made you wonder, okay, so behind the scenes, what is happening that people are afraid to actually tell the truth about who they're really voting for, and what are they really refreshed by? And I think that one of the things that came out was even people that were on the Democrat side were saying, he tells it like it is and says the things that we would never say in public, but it's kind of entertaining to watch him do it.
I don't know any Democrats who said that.
Not out loud, but they voted. People voted places differently than what they were talking about in polite society or other things, right? Which was one of the reasons it was shocking for Donald and for most of the country is like he actually won wow, what happened there? And there's still, I think political science departments are going to be studying that for the next several generations to figure out what happened there.
Well, and since the election, this divide has not gotten any better. It's gotten worse, and it seems to be that Trump is actively seeking to make that divide even worse and polarize us even more rather than unify or bridge that divide.
Do you feel like Obama did that at all?
I feel like in hindsight, there were a lot of blind spots there, and I don't think there was an awareness of just how deep that divide under the surface was. Now it's out in the open, and it's being exploited by Trump every day. But clearly, he did not create it. It pre-existed, predated Trump. It was there during the Obama years.
And probably before.
Absolutely before.
Right.
And I think it's gotten worse, in the last 10 years in our, social media
or
days.
media in general. I mean, well, social media has really made it a situation where people could anonymously beat the crap out of each other, to use a technical term. And if they've never met you physically, or they've never looked you in the eye, or it's been a while, it's easier to say things and berate and fight and go into combat mode.
Absolutely. And we're all in our echo chambers. We get fed a steady media diet, based on, what ideological preferences we have demonstrated through our use of Facebook and other social media outlets, and it just further polarizes us, and we're all in our little echo chambers, and we no longer have a lot of the civic institutions that existed maybe when my parents were coming of age, that brought people together despite maybe being Democrat or Republican. People participated in certain civic rituals and institutions together.
Such as?
Everything from bowling leagues to church to PTA to, you could go the whole list. And people have also in the last 10 years self-segregated geographically. So, urban centers are predominantly blue. And so people who, feel one way are going to gravitate towards that area. And people who are more conservative tend to avoid those areas. So we've seen an increasing, self-segregation of where we choose to live. And these pockets then become deeper blue, deeper red, with no real opportunities to interact.
So I'm curious, though, when you did your cross-country trek, speaking of this whole theme, what did you find when you got out into rural America? Were the people different there than you expected? Did they have additional limbs, fewer limbs than you expected? Did they eat children every day of the week? What was it that you found?
We found people. In Indiana, we met some people that were so hardworking, holding down multiple jobs, doing everything they could to get by, family-oriented folks. They were just people, and they were struggling financially, really struggling. And they believed that Trump was going to be the answer to their financial problems. We didn't see, I didn't expect to find,
mutations?
Mutations. But, it was striking that the communities, and like I said, we took small little, not even state roads, just small roads through little towns and pockets of southern Ohio and other places where it was striking. There was no opportunity infrastructure there.
What does that mean?
No industry, no real educational institutions, community colleges, no way that a person could tap into an infrastructure to climb a ladder to economic success. I mean, there were the supermarkets, the restaurants, a couple of existing stores and things like that, and you worked there or there was nothing else. But there were no, there were, like I said, no industry, no real educational opportunities.
Did they have a desire for those things?
I can't say, I don't want to speak for all, of Red America. Interestingly, I'm thinking about this one couple that we met, we struck up a conversation with at a bar in Westville, Indiana, Jimmy and Sharon. And they were as hardworking as can be, and we probed, so what is it you want for your kids? And education was not up there.
Right.
It was not to save for college. It was to, buy them a car. And so there, to your point or your question, do they want those things? That was not on their radar, at least for that couple. But, how could it be on their radar if it's not there,
Well, usually, and this is where the conservative mindset goes, it's like if there's a need or there's an opportunity, someone's going to try to build something there. I mean, you were in the charter school area, and charter schools, that's school choice, and that's not something we normally associate with a liberal mindset. So we commend you for you reaching outside of the box again,
I think
popping bubbles.
All more than a label. I am very much a liberal, but there are certainly areas where I feel much more conservative, and I don't think we can all be reduced to labels.
And I'm in agreement. What I find is that humans are complicated animals. But if you talk about the things that are important, yes, education, safety, reasonable financial placement in society, being able to provide for the needs for your family, I think those are the things that really bring us together, whether you're liberal, whether you're conservative. And a lot of times there are the fights that break out about, well, you shouldn't just get participation trophies and everything else. But I've talked to many of my quote-unquote liberal friends, and they're like, no, don't give people things that they didn't earn. And it's like, wait a minute, you're sounding kind of conservative there. Don't let that show out in public. You're going to get in trouble. And we just have good conversations about it, because human need is I think, a bigger driver than, as you mentioned, the political label. And yet we're very quick to self-segregate, to clump ourselves into people that we believe think like we do on a number of different areas. But then we find out they're complicated too.
Yep. And
there are places where you overlap with my thinking, or vice versa. When we just talk as humans, a lot gets done.
And that's the point. We need to talk as humans, and we're not. And there are a number of initiatives that have sprung up. Some of them predate the election, but there's been a virtual explosion in the aftermath of the election aimed at transpartisan dialogue, call it what you will, and trying to get people who otherwise might never interact to start talking. And that I find it very encouraging, even though I still feel like it's a self-selecting group that's deciding to participate in that.
Absolutely.
And I guess I'd be curious to ask you, Chris, as you can probably tell, I feel a real sense of urgency about this, finding ways to get us talking. Do you share that sense of urgency?
Yeah. I think that as people, we do have that sense of urgency for collaboration. I do think that there is a place for less than civil discourse if there's something that needs to occur. Like, for example, during the Obama administration and things, the conservative side was much more eager to understand and to get their voice heard, and now it's switched, because that often happens with administrations. The sense of urgency was higher. That's where you saw the emergence of things like the Tea Party movement, where people wanted to get their voice heard and everything else. But there are people who I think at their core do believe that we should get along. The example I would use at that point is people would say, well, can't we just get along on healthcare? And my response was, no, I've read the legislation. I read hundreds of pages of the draft documents. And what I saw was that our seasoned citizens would be at risk. And so I said, does that mean we get along and say, okay, we're okay with it if you just kick the seniors less or not as hard, but go ahead and still kick them, or do we stand up and do we fight? And when people think of it in that terms, they're like, well, no, we don't want to hurt seniors. Well, then there are things that we need to bring up and discuss, and if it gets heated, it gets heated.
Right.
And in fact, having those checks and balances in place actually help us to sometimes get a better result or a better outcome, because we're looking at things more holistically instead of everyone just laying down and going along, whether it's for the good or the bad, because a lot of things are not considered that way. But the dialogue needs to happen about everything that we're not supposed to talk about.
Everything. And, you know, it's interesting. You were just talking about the early Obama years where, you know, Democrats controlled, you know, the executive branch, both houses of Congress. And the Tea Party, as you said, was making its voice heard. What I didn't see, though, during that period of 2009 to 2011 is, you know, right now, I think liberals are feeling, oh my gosh, what's happening? And so they're the ones really trying to initiate these dialogues across party lines. I didn't see that happening in that period. I don't see an analog. Yes, the Tea Party arose. Yes, they wanted to get their voice heard. But that effort to reach out and say, I want to understand you better. I really want, I'm curious about you. I want to get to understand you. Let's have a dialogue. I didn't see any of that.
I saw a lot of that.
You did?
Yes. But I also will acknowledge, as we were discussing before the show, that there is a difference in the mindsets. And this is why, so the media has tended liberal for a very long time. And I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but from a conservative perspective, that's always, there's been the feeling that the media leans heavily liberal. And so they weren't showcasing the efforts for outreach. They weren't showcasing how the Tea Party would self-police and make sure that people who were disturbers of caca would not be allowed into their rallies and things, and they would have crashers and others that would come in and disrupt that weren't of the Tea Party. And that's the stuff that would get the media play and everything else. So there was a lot that was happening behind the scenes where they felt they were being attacked. But the other part is, as we discussed before the show, is that the liberal mindset tends to be one where we're going to help by setting up rules or laws or stopping people from from hurting themselves. Where the conservative mindset is often very libertarian in that it's like, I'm not going to do it, just leave me alone. And so, you know, if they want to be left alone versus reaching out or trying to change other people's opinions, there is going to be a difference in the way that that voice is raised. And
I guess a lot of the organizations I'm thinking of, and my own included, are not starting from the position of let's talk so I can convince you of my position and bring you to my side, but really let's talk, because if we don't, this country falls apart.
Right.
And you know, I guess it's just that basic. I haven't seen the same, but I'm completely open and would love to hear about where that's coming on the right. Almost all the initiatives that I have found aimed at bridging the partisan divide stem from the left. And if you Google how to talk with a Trump supporter, the list goes on and on and on and on.
Right.
If you Google how to talk with a Democrat or how to talk with a Hillary Clinton supporter, nothing.
Well, because they just figure that's not where I want to go. I'm just not going to do it, and then they walk away. It's different. Like I said, the mindset is there. And also, I mean, one thing, and I want to actually we have like 3 minutes left. Okay. I wanted to cover a little bit about American Pals and what you're doing so we can get you some exposure. But I'm loving the conversation. So let's just hit that quickly, though. American Pals. American Pals,
it has one very simple goal, which is to enable middle and high school students to develop safe, non-digital relationships with peers outside of their geographic and cultural bubbles.
Right.
So we pair middle and high school classrooms across the country for pen pal relationships.
Right.
Very old-fashioned. Kids who've grown up in the digital age have, many of them, never written or received a handwritten letter. They've grown up on social media. Letter writing is a fundamentally different kind of communication.
Yes.
You don't have the same instantaneous knee-jerk reactions. You have to digest. We don't use shorthand as much. You're forced to really...
Do you make them use vowels? Some of them don't know what vowels are.
They will have to use vowels.
Oh, okay.
And so it's really trying to both address sort of the communication challenges that a lot of kids growing up in today's digital age face by exposing them to this form of communication that's been around for millennia, as well as get people outside their bubbles at a young age.
Okay. Well, I'm assuming that some of the conversation that may be discussed in these groups would be dialogue like we're having to help people understand. And since we're almost out of time, though, I want to be able to have them directed to your website for more information, and that is?
www.americanpals.org.
Perfect. Well, if you'll hold on for just a moment, we need to just make some announcements for our underwriters, the Liberty Forum. So thanks for joining us, Ann.
My pleasure.
And as I mentioned, the Liberty Forum, formerly the Conservative Forum, are underwriters for the show. They've been doing that now for about 7 years, and they are best known, however, for their speaker series. And that happens this evening. It'll be going on at 432 Stearland Road here in Mountain View at 7 o'clock. It's just a few minutes from the studio here. The speaker in November is going to be David French. He's an attorney and contributor at the National Review. In December, the ever-popular Andrew Klavan, pundit, author, and screenwriter, as well as podcaster, will be present. You can find out more by Googling the Liberty Forum. You can still get there from theconservativeforum.com and get more information about upcoming speakers into the next year. In closing, however, I do want to encourage you, first of all, to look up AmericanPals.org, but to continue the dialogue not just within your bubble. As Ann and I were talking about, sometimes the perspectives you can gain from reaching out to others that are outside of your political leaning or potentially could be outside of your just leanings in life, you might find some interesting conversational points, but you also might find out that their perspectives are actually much closer to yours than you originally expected. We thank you for joining us this evening. This has been The Right Side. I continue to be Chris Pareja, and I'll look forward to seeing you in person or on the show sometime soon. But if you just can't wait, reach out to us at therightsidetv@gmail.com, and we'll try to get those questions or flaming darts addressed for you. Thanks again, and have a great night.